The dawn that broke over the Serra da Taquara didn't feel like a victory. It didn't have the warmth of a new beginning or the golden promise of a world saved. Instead, the sun rose like a bruised, anemic eye, peering through a thick, suffocating fog that tasted of wet ash and ozone. It was a weary truce between two exhausted armies, the chaotic, messy life of the highlands and the cold, relentless geometry of the below. I sat in the tall grass at the edge of the valley, my back leaning against the rough, mossy bark of an ancient araucaria tree. For the first time in my life, I truly appreciated the way the tree's trunk twisted and spiraled, its branches reaching out in a chaotic, inefficient sprawl that defied every law of the vow. It was beautiful because it was imperfect. My right arm, the basalt one, rested heavily in my lap. It was no longer an infection crawling up my skin. It was a permanent monument, a 500-pound anchor of matte gray stone that seemed to pull at the very foundation of my soul. The blue veins that had once pulsed with the mother's command were dark now, like dead neon tubes buried in a quarry. The moss that had sprouted from the hairline fractures in the stone was damp with morning dew, smelling of old graves and new life. I ran my human left hand over the cold, granular surface of the forearm. It didn't feel like skin. It didn't even feel like my grandfather's red bricks. It felt like I was touching the raw, unformatted skeleton of the planet itself. Beside me, Lucas was staring at his own hands. He had returned to flesh, mostly. His skin was the color of curdled milk, and his fingertips were still tipped with a hard, gray mineral, the texture of unpolished slate. He was shivering, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps that rattled in the morning quiet. "It's too loud, Leandro," he whispered. His voice was a fragile thread, stripped of its digital resonance. "Loud?" I asked. My own voice was different now, a heavy, grinding bass that sounded like two millstones turning against each other. It was a souvenir I would carry forever, a vocal cord made of gravel and static. "No," Lucas said, his eyes wide and unfocused, darting toward the rustle of a nearby bush. "The birds, the wind, the way the grass rubs together, it's all unordered, it's all noise. After the vow, the world feels like a broken radio, Leandro. I can't find the station anymore." I understood the terror in his voice. When you've been synchronized with the perfect mathematical hum of the mother, the real world sounds like a disaster. It sounds like 1,000 voices screaming at different frequencies, an equation that refuses to balance. We stood up, a slow, agonizing process. We walked back to the place where the house had been. The house was gone. There was no square hole anymore, no geysers of blue light. There was only a shallow depression in the red earth, already being reclaimed by the wild highlands grass. No red, no green, no cold white. Even the brick pillars had been swallowed, leaving nothing behind but a lingering scent of wood smoke and old imbuya wood that seemed to rise directly from the dirt like a ghost. "What about Grandma?" Lucas asked, his voice cracking. I looked at the spot where her bedroom used to be. I remembered her as a star, as an acoustic dampener, as a woman who fought a god with a handful of salt and a prayer made of dirt. She's the Highlands now, Lucas. She's the noise that keeps the machine from starting back up. She didn't leave us. She just expanded her perimeter. She's the reason the sky is still blue and the trees are still crooked. We began to walk toward the dirt road, our shadows trailing behind us, long, jagged, and just a bit too geometric. Every time my basalt foot hit the ground, I felt a faint vibration travel up through my leg and settle in the base of my skull. It wasn't a tap, it was a pulse, a reminder. We were still registered in the system. We were the remainder, the pieces of data that the mother couldn't delete. And the vow never stops calculating. Living after the vow is like living in a house where the walls are made of thin glass, but everyone else thinks they are made of solid brick. You see the cracks where others see patterns. You hear the humming where others hear silence. We didn't go back to the village. We couldn't. How do you explain a boy with fingers made of slate? How do you explain a man whose right arm is a 500-pound slab of volcanic stone that grows wildflowers from its fissures? Instead, we retreated to the old ceramics factory on the edge of the woods. It was a ruin of rusted iron and mountains of gray clay dust, a place that understood the weight of minerals better than people ever could. I spent my days making bricks, not the perfect sharp-edged blocks of an industrial press. I made them lumpy. I made them uneven. I intentionally pressed my human thumb into the wet clay, leaving a whirl of biological chaos in every piece. I was making noise. I was filling the world with things that couldn't be neatly stacked in a digital grid. Lucas stayed in the shadows of the rafters, perched like a gargoyle on the rusted catwalks. He had become sensitive to the light of the sun. He said it felt like a low-resolution glare. He spent his hours looking at the highlands through a jagged shard of indigo-tinted quartz he'd found in the factory's debris. "They're still calculating, Leandro." His voice would drift down from the darkness, a dry rattle like pebbles shaken in a silk bag. They can see the lines on the horizon. Every time a storm rolls in from the south, the grid flickers. The mother didn't die. She just suffered a buffer overflow. She's waiting for the sectors to clear so she can write over us again. I never told him about the tapping. I didn't want to give him more data to process. I heard it every night at exactly 3:14 a.m. Not on the windows, not on the pipes. I heard it in the rhythm of my own pulse, a vibration that started in my basalt fingertips and climbed up to my jaw. Tap, tap, tap. The tall man was the watcher at the gate. He was the one who checked the seals, the one who looked for the gaps in our biological armor. Occasionally, I'd see him standing at the edge of the woods, a 9-foot vertical line in a world that was trying so hard to remain curved and messy. He didn't have a face, but I knew he was watching the moss grow on my arm. He was waiting for the organic rot to finish its work so the stone could be reclaimed. The Silicon Bible hadn't been erased from my mind. It had just been minimized. I could still see the blueprints if I closed my eyes too tight. I could still feel the mother's pull when the moon was full and the air turned cold. We hadn't stopped the vow. We had just caused a temporary logic error. One evening, I found a small rectangular door carved into the back wall of the kiln. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. It wasn't wood, and it wasn't stone. It was a lack of space, a gap in reality that smelled of ozone and ancient frozen dust. I stood before it, my stone arm throbbing with a sudden violent heat. The Leandro file in my head felt a pull, a desire to be archived, to finally let go of the pain, the grief, and the exhausting weight of being alive. The vow offered a perfect silent peace. I looked at the gap. I saw the indigo grid stretching into forever, and for a second I saw a reflection in the void, a woman with a tattered poncho holding a handful of red Highlands mud. Grandma. She was the glitch that wouldn't die. I reached down and grabbed a bucket of wet, foul-smelling red clay. With my ball-salt hand, I scooped out a massive, dripping glob of Highlands filth, and I slammed it into the center of the geometric door. I smeared it until the lines were gone, until the geometry was buried under the mess of the earth. "Not today," I whispered, my voice more stone than human. Lucas climbed down from the catwalks, his stone fingertips brushing my shoulder. He looked at the mud-stained wall and nodded. "The calculation is delayed," he said. We sat together in the dark of the factory, listening to the rain start to fall on the Highlands. It was a messy, unpredictable, beautiful sound. It was the sound of being alive in the margin of a page. But as I looked down at the floorboards beneath our feet, I knew the truth. The mother was still there. The tall man was still marking the trees, and sooner or later the vow would come to collect the remainder. Until then, we would stay in the noise.